Cool. So is this show?
What's up, everybody?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lansing Marketing Hackers. How you guys doing?
We're doing good. How about you, Julie?
Good. Yeah, I'm so looking forward to today's conversation. Welcome to everyone. Give us a thumbs up. Let us know you can hear us okay. Welcome to Lansing Marketing Hackers. This is our final presentation of the year. I cannot believe, it's December already. But here we are, and so looking forward to today's conversation about SEO. I know those are three letters that some of us love to hate because it's constantly evolving and changing, gets very technical in nature. And so really looking forward to today's conversation as Jesse Flores joins us to really break this down and talk about some changes that are coming in 2021. So welcome, everyone. So glad you can join us. I'm Julie Holton. I'm the founder and principal strategist of M Connections Marketing Agency, joined today by my fellow Marketing Hackers hosts, Chad Muntz and Paul Schmidt. Chad, what's going on in your world?
Hey, just living the dream. I am the digital sales manager at WLNS, part of a bigger organization called Nexstar Media Group. So we have, I'm involved in anything digital marketing, and there's a lot of tools in the old toolbox, but SEO is a crucial part of any solid marketing strategy. And I'm really excited because Jesse Flores of SuperWebPros is a super smart dude and can make information digestible. So he's going to be a great asset for us today. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely. And he's got so much to talk about. Paul, what's going on in your world? How are you doing?
Wow, things are well. Things are really good in the video world, and we're excited to be part of it. Once again, I'm Paul Schmidt. I'm the owner and creative video strategist for Introduce Multimedia, video storytelling for nonprofit organizations and socially responsible small businesses. And we are very fortunate to be in the world that we are in. We've been very blessed to work with a lot of great organizations this year and help them bridge this digital divide. But I'm also excited to hear from Jesse because you're right, Chad. He does have a lot of details to go over, and it's just going to be amazing to see how he's able to fit all the things in his head in this time frame. That's the whole. Yeah. That's what I get amazed by. I'm like, okay, can we do it?
No pressure or anything, right, no. Jesse? Yeah, so before we get to Jesse, let's take a quick moment to hear a few words from our sponsor. Symposia Labs so generously donates to us every month. So Kara, take it away. Tell us about Symposia, and thank you for joining us and for sponsoring.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, guys. My name is Kara Wassink. I'm a marketing assistant at Symposia Labs. We are obviously working remotely, but we're traditionally based in the West Michigan area, mostly Grand Rapids, Holland. But we do a lot with digital marketing, all things digital marketing with other organizations. We do things from overall marketing strategy to pay-per-click advertising, content creation, SEO as well, email marketing, social media. So all things that will grow businesses. And so I'm excited to hear a lot about SEO and content as well, since that's a lot of what I do in my role. So I'm super excited to hear from Jesse today and to be with you guys today. So that's a little bit about us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kara. And yeah, I completely agree. Even when we're ingrained in this world, it's always so good to hear from other people, right? That's the whole point of Lansing Marketing Hackers. So we can all get together and share what we're working on, what we know, what we don't know. And so let's get right to today's program. Jesse Flores spent years working in software development and tech entrepreneurship before moving to Lansing several years ago, where he launched SuperWebPros. He's an amazing agency partner, I know, for both Paul Schmidt at Uno Deuce and for M Connections. And in part because, as Chad said, Jesse's team does an incredible job of simplifying these really complex technologies and the web in general for those of us that are not the Amazons of the world. So today, Jesse is going to talk about SEO, what's coming down the pipeline. Jesse Flores, thank you so much for joining us, for giving your time. Welcome to you, and take it away, my friend.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much to you guys for having me here. I'm super, super excited. I also can't believe it's already December, but to that I say good riddance 2020. I'm looking forward to 2021. So I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you guys about SEO. So I'm going to go ahead and flip my screen on. So let's try this out, make sure it all works properly. All right. Do you guys see my screen here? Are we all good? Nope. Ooh. Let's see here. I lost, it looks like I might have lost some audio from you guys, but maybe that's to be expected. Okay, cool, sweet. All right, so it looks like everything is good. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. So even the technical guys don't understand how technology works. In fact, more often than not, people ask me, can we do X? And I'm like, yeah, it's only time and money, but I have no idea. We'll figure it out. So I'm gonna focus today's talk on technical SEO. There's a lot that can be said about this, and I feel like it's one of the areas that doesn't really get discussed as much as maybe some of the other components of SEO. So as Julie mentioned, I've got a background in software. I started out as a corporate guy. I built a career in with a multi-billion-dollar retail company doing operations management and software management years and years ago. Feels like a lifetime ago. And then ultimately left that to do my first tech startup, which went really well until it didn't. Around that time, I moved up to Michigan and started doing more custom software development, predominantly for venture-backed or angel-invested software companies. So these were typically pretty well-funded projects and typically things that were pretty cutting edge. As we were trying to grow our software development agency, we found that inbound marketing was working pretty well for us. We had a couple of ebooks that generated hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue over the course of a couple of months. And this was in 2012, 2013, and it was really kind of the beginning of some of what HubSpot was doing. And it was really not only fun, but also we were seeing it be really successful. But what I wasn't seeing was that while somebody who was technical or really sophisticated in technology like us could kind of figure this stuff out, build the systems, and get it going, there were a lot of other companies that either weren't aware or didn't have the technical skills to figure out how to do implement some of these strategies. And so SuperWebPros was founded on the back of that to try and make the web easy for all the non-Amazons of the world, for all the small and medium-sized companies that don't have a software development background or tech guys, sitting around able to solve their more complex problems. And really our focus has been predominantly on websites and web integration and really being the technical partner that Julie and Paul mentioned at the beginning. So I'm going to start though with a secret, because as successful as we were initially with digital marketing, I've been really frustrated with it for the last couple of years. And the reason is because we'd follow all these best practices, but started to see little to no results. We'd be blogging and we weren't seeing more traffic. We weren't seeing better SEO. We would be advertising and we'd find it really difficult to get a return on investment. And so I started to ask myself, why? What was changing that was making this so much harder than it seemed to be? And I stumbled upon this graphic, which shows how much the web has grown since I started doing inbound and digital marketing in 2011, 2012 to today, where there were back then fewer than 500 million, so let's call it 200 million websites globally. 8 years ago, there are almost 2 billion websites today. So that's a massive increase of both traffic and competition. So yeah, I was great at SEO in 2011, but who wasn't? There just wasn't that much competition. And so today it's way harder, and there's way more content and way more competition than there was before. The other thing I started to notice was that search results were changing, right? It wasn't just text anymore. So the traditional Google expectation that so many of our customers have is that when somebody searches for something that they might want to rank for, there's going to be a little text box that shows your meta title and your meta description, and it's going to be like, oh, this is best agency on the planet or whatever it is. But when you actually start to look at search results, what you'll see is that very often search is not text. It's images, it's snippets, it's profiles, it's these frequently asked or people also ask questions, it's excerpts. And a lot of this is being driven not necessarily by web pages per se, but by structured data and content being returned from websites back to search engines. All that's a long way of saying that it was really clear that search was about way more than just keywords or just blog posts. But I wasn't still sure what that meant. And so I started to dig in the best way that I knew how, which was to start analyzing data, both our data and customer data. And there's a ton of data out there if you know what you're looking for. So what I want to cover today are 3 things. Number 1, I want to cover 4 key dimensions of technical SEO that I use to frame most of our technical efforts. Number 2, I want to talk about 6 pieces of low-hanging fruit that I think you can knock out really quickly with either your team or working with a team like ours. Things that when we look at most websites that are struggling, these are probably the first 6 things that we find wrong. And then the last thing I want to talk about are 7 tools that you might need to use in order to perform a deep dive for ongoing SEO and maintenance. So that'll be the path that we go through. What are the main components of SEO we pay attention to? What's the low-hanging fruit you can pay attention to right away? And then if you want to keep doing this ongoing, what are some of the tools you need to have in your, some of the arrows you need to have in your quiver? So let's start really quickly with what is technical SEO. Typically, when we talk about technical SEO, we're really talking about website and server optimizations that help your crawlers crawl, index, and return your information when a user asks a search engine a question. Now, I use the phrase search engine instead of Google because Google isn't the only search engine. We can think of things like Alexa or Siri as search engines as well. And even within the web, there are different platforms themselves that have search as a core component. Now, that's a whole other topic, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into that, but it's worth knowing that from the beginning, when you start thinking about technical SEO and you start thinking about search, that you start to disavow the notion that Google is the only search engine or that text is the only mode of search. Fundamentally, search has always been and still is about helping people find answers to questions in the most effective way possible, while making it easy for bots to crawl, parse, and slot your information for quick retrieval on massive servers, indexes, and databases. Now, one thing that can be really easy to forget is that Google is a business, right? Google makes billions of dollars a year fulfilling this mission of marrying information with searchers, of marrying the best fit for what they think you're looking for with the best possibility with your question that you're asking. These crawls aren't free. Storage isn't free. There are billions of dollars of infrastructure and cost that go into crawling, indexing, and storing all this information. And so one reason why I think about that and why I mention it is because as you start to think about the technical dimension of SEO, which is probably leaning a little bit more towards bots than people, though not exclusively that way, it's helpful to think about the fact that everything that Google is doing on your site requires resources to be consumed, and that the extent to which you can help your site or your marketing efforts reduce their overhead, it does in fact actually help with getting things indexed, right? It just makes sense. In general, I tend to think of technical SEO as having 4 key dimensions that you can break down. Number 1 is speed, 2 is security, 3 is indexability, and 4 is usability and accessibility. What's not included in technical SEO, but is still massively important, are things like proactive keyword research, content strategy, backlink building, content promotion. All of these things are still really, really important for SEO because they're the human dimension of SEO. Those are the things that make sure you're creating content for people in a way that people can consume and enjoy, and that you are sharing that information. Right? So I don't want this to be to be perceived as like, if you do all the technical things right, you're absolutely going to rank in Google. That's not the way it works. It's not the way it's ever worked. You have to marry both the good content side of this and the outreach side, the backlink side, with the technical side, which is tuning for the engines and for the bots. And so I'm not going to spend any time talking about keyword research or strategy or any of the things that a million blogs can help you solve, or ask Julie, or she's great at that kind of stuff. Like, there's a lot of people that can help with that, and so I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about that. We're really going to focus more on the bot side of this, and we're going to start with speed, because this is hugely, hugely, hugely important and only becoming more so. In fact, I could probably do a whole talk on this itself, but we probably will actually publish a talk on this on our website at some point. And this is becoming even more important because some of you may already know this, others of you may not. But for the last couple of years, there have actually been 2 different indexes when we're talking about Google search. There's been a mobile index and there's been a desktop index. Over the course of the last, 2 years, let's say, they've effectively been merging those 2 indexes into one. So new sites immediately or automatically get put on the mobile index. Legacy sites have been being migrated over time. But starting in March, the old desktop index goes away and the new mobile index is the only one that matters. And again, Google's a business, and this makes sense because 2/3 or more of their website traffic is on a mobile device. And speed is probably the number 1 factor that influences mobile search ability. Now, as marketers and tech people, we tend to always be on the best devices, the best networks, but that's not the vast majority of the population. And so when you're running speed tests, or if you're using Google's page speed tool, it's important to recognize that speed is based on a 3G connection with a mediocre smartphone. Most people are 2 or 3 or 4 years behind when it comes to their smartphone, and still a lot of people on 3G networks. That's changing, but that's the barometer. And the reality is that if you do well on 3G connections with mediocre smartphones, you're going to do great on everything else. In general, there's 2 major impediments to speed. I would describe those 2 impediments as heavy pages and lots of requests. Now, what makes a page heavy is simply how much data needs to be transmitted from the server through the network to the browser or the person who's searching. The more data, the heavier it is. The more stuff that has to move through the pipe, the network pipe, let's call it, the heavier that page ends up being. So what are the factors that make a page heavy? Before I say what those are, it's important to recognize that when we look at a web page, we see this beautiful slide. But what a browser sees is all this code, right? In fact, these slides are built in pure HTML and JavaScript. And so when a browser is parsing, as my browser is parsing a page, it starts top to bottom, and by default, it won't move on to the next line until it's already parsed and rendered the previous line, which means that this part here won't be rendered until this part's here. Well, why does that matter? It's because when you've got things like big images or code bloat or JavaScript up here that require a response or require a lot of time to load before that's going to be done before it moves down here. So if I've got a big image up here, the rest of this page is waiting. It's what's called blocked before it can render. It's blocked until that image or that other code is loaded. So some of the most common factors we see that make pages heavy, number 1 is definitely big images, especially if you're in a content management system with I'll call them with typical users who are, downloading something directly from Canva or, Photoshop or something, and then just importing it directly without any kind of optimization. Then big images are absolutely one of the things that can slow down a website very quickly. Second thing that can slow down your website pretty quickly is code bloat. We see this a lot with customers who are on WordPress, especially if you've got an old theme, you've got a ton of plugins, and you've been building your website basically without a plan, just kind of adding things to solve individual problems, and you aren't doing a lot of vetting of the plugins or a lot of vetting of the themes, those can very quickly start to bloat your pages as well. Third thing is poor or no caching policies. I'll talk about caching in a little bit. Another thing is multiple requests or calls to third-party libraries. So almost all of us will install things like Google Analytics or Facebook's little tag widget thing. I'm blanking on what it's called exactly, but we'll install these things into our sites because they help us with tracking and managing campaigns and things like that. And that's totally fine. But you start adding multiple layers of these things, opt-in pop-ups, your Google Analytics, your Facebook Analytics, your SumoMe, your all these other things, those start to increase the number of requests that the browser has to make before it can render the page if it's not done properly. And the result is your page gets slow because it ends up blocking requests before the page is able to completely render. Now, one of the questions that I see or was posted here really quickly was, will these tips apply to all businesses no matter the industry or size? The short answer is yes, absolutely. This is all about just building quality, technically sound websites. But I will also say this, the benefit isn't universally shared. A small business just starting out or with very little SEO kind of juice, let's say, or very little marketing, so to speak, you're probably already not going to rank. That's a whole other topic, and I'll address that in the comment sections. There are probably more productive ways for you to get traffic and get customers than SEO. The benefit of SEO really is going to accrue to bigger companies that are investing in getting a lot more traffic, that already have a lot of organic traffic. And so while these principles work for any business, they will disproportionately benefit larger companies with larger sitemaps. Second component behind speed is security. And this is a basic question. Is your website secure? Some really simple facets of web security are encrypted connections using SSL. If you ever look at a website and you see the little lockup here, that means that it's got that the encryption is connected with what's called an SSL certificate. There's no excuse anymore not to have one of these. Almost every web host allows you to install them for free. So if you don't have one, get one. That's super simple. The second thing is no malicious code. Now I say that because that sounds obvious, but if you're using outdated themes, plugins, or software, you're actually more likely to to end up with malicious code showing up on your website. A lot of people have the misconception that only big companies like Home Depot or Target are the ones that get hacked. That's not the case. In most cases, what's happening is bad actors are sending out bots looking for known vulnerabilities in things like WordPress plugins, WordPress themes, or whatever, and they're looking for ways to hack into those vulnerabilities and for a variety of reasons, again, a whole other talk, but they're sending out these automated bots to go and hack into these things so they can use your servers and your resources to carry out their other activities, right? So it's not just about them stealing your data, it's actually about using your platform to further their malicious efforts. The other comment I'm going to make about malicious code is related to the previous thing, is particularly ad tech or advertising technologies occasionally will run the risk of showing up as a false positive with malicious code. So if you're ever trying to run a PPC ad or you're trying to run some kind of ad and you keep getting it rejected because of malicious code, first thing I would suggest is check your ad tracking software because sometimes the same methods that they used for ad tracking can actually trigger a false positive with malicious code. But for web security, SSL is a no-brainer. They're easy to do. Everyone should have one. And then keeping your software updated is a really important component of website security. And then making sure you don't have any false positives with respect to malicious code. Third facet of technical SEO behind speed and security is indexability. Is your website crawlable, indexable, and architecturally clean? So when we start thinking about indexability, we're going to start thinking about things like XML sitemaps. Is all of your content, or at least the appropriate content, indexed and synced with Google Search Console? Does your URL and site structure make sense both to users and to bots? Are you returning structured data where possible? Do you have quality content? I'll talk about what that means in a minute, because I don't mean the same thing as we often mean. Do you have few or no 404s, or do you have proper redirects in place? And so this is about making sure that there aren't any blank pages on your website, that every page has a clear purpose, that it's intelligible from an architectural standpoint to both visitors and to bots, and that the content on that individual page makes sense within the context of what the website's supposed to be doing. So when we talk about URL and site structure, just to make sure everyone understands what we're talking about, if you look at a URL in any given for any given site, that's what shows up in the browser. So up here, or in this image down here, everything after the slash from your domain. So we're superwebpros.com / a bunch of stuff. Now, in this particular case, I screenshotted from one of our help documents. You'll see that it's superwebpros.com / docs / how we manage customer content. And when we talk about a URL being well constructed, you see here that this site here, docs, makes it really clear in the site where we are. And that this structure also maps to the breadcrumb here, home, docs, super support hub, and that the title here maps to the, and that the slug here maps to the title here, and the title of the video here. There's consistency between what we're calling the page and the resource, and also where it is inside of the structure of our website. Looking at these slides, so we've got a ton of slides that we've made available. This one here is on talks, because I'm giving a talk, and it's on technical SEO. The URL structure reflects the content. And that's a really small but really important thing, and not hard to do without a little bit of thought, that helps make sure your site is indexable and crawlable. Now, when I talk about quality content, I don't necessarily mean the same thing that we typically mean when we're talking about, like, is this, can people read it? Do they like it? Do they enjoy it? Is it delightful? All those things. What I'm talking about is making sure there's no thin content, meaning that you don't have any content that's less than, let's call it 200 words on average. It can vary if you're on an e-commerce site with product descriptions. Like, that's a very different thing than if you're a service business. So pages with no thin content. You don't have duplicated content. That where you have duplicated content, because sometimes it is important to repeat content, especially calls to actions and things like that. That content is canonicalized. This is, by the way, especially important if you are doing guest posts, or either you're hosting them or you're giving them, making sure that there is a canonical tag that lets the search engines know where the authoritative post is. And then, of course, making sure you've got internal linking. So if I'm doing a blog post on website security, and I've written a cornerstone post on website security, and we've written a couple of supporting articles on it, that those articles all link to each other internally, means that it's easy for somebody who's reading an article 1 on website security can easily get to article 2, 3, or 4. All of these things help users find their way around your site, but they also help bots to crawl those links and understand the relationships between the information that's available on your site. Finally, we get to usability and accessibility. Is your website usable by a diverse group of users? One of the most important components here is mobile first. Again, most people are looking at these things on a mobile device. But the second is readable fonts. I'm getting to an age now where I need to wear glasses. This is a new thing. I don't love it, but it's the case. And when you've got a large audience of people on the internet, there are a lot of people that can't read your size 14 pixel font. And so generally speaking, making sure your fonts are at least 18 pixels or whatever the equivalent ends up being is hugely helpful. So can people read your fonts without having to make a ton of adjustments? Yes, they can do it, but you want to natively support this stuff. Little to no layout shift. So if you've ever been on Forbes.com, which drives me nuts, and you're reading an article and then they pop an ad and it shifts the ads or the page up and down while you're trying to read. That's called a layout shift. It's terrible for users and bots don't like it. Alt tags to describe images and making sure your website is screen reader friendly. There are a lot of people who are visually impaired using the web. And so while accessibility is also its own other topic, there are some small things you can do on your pages to make sure that you are structuring your information and that you're describing content in a way that somebody who is visually impaired is able to actually consume the information on your page without having to require additional assistance. In other words, can people use your website without being frustrated? That's really the core driver for the usability, accessibility thing. And remember that not everybody can see as well as you can. Not everybody, and that's a big part of this. Couple of pieces of low-hanging fruit. So those are the 4 things that I typically look at when somebody says, hey, I want to make my website better from a technical standpoint. Those are the 4 dimensions I think of. First, speed, security, indexability, and the structure of the actual architectural structure of the site. And usually when we start diving into a website, we see that there are 6 areas of like low-hanging fruit that I think are almost always the first things we want to address. These are like the technical no-brainers. So number 1 is bloated images. We see this on almost every single website that we do an audit on. And part of this comes from using tools like Canva, which are great, right? They allow you to design images without being a designer. But when you're using Canva, by default, it almost always says PNG recommended, which is great for print. It is terrible for your web graphics unless you're doing something that's specifically vector related. But this is an example from an audit we did for one of our customers. Same image. This is the JPEG. This is the PNG. Not a whole lot of visual difference, but this one is almost 9 times bigger than the other one in terms of size. So when we talk about heavy websites and code bloat, these are the number 1 things. And so whether it's you managing your website or whether you've got end users who are updating content, probably the number 1 thing you can help them with is reducing image size. Keep images ideally less than 500 kilobytes. Not always possible, but when possible, try and do that. In general, you want to prefer WebP images to JPEGs, to PNGs, to GIFs. As funny as GIFs are, they are generally terrible for performance. Now, the problem with WebP is browser support. Safari has long held out with being able to render WebP properly, especially on iOS devices. That is supposedly changing. It may have actually changed this quarter. I don't recall exactly. But if they don't support it natively, there are apps and plugins that allow you to serve WebP and then degrade down to JPEG or PNG or whatever the next appropriate thing is when somebody's browser doesn't render WebP. And so there are tools to help you with that. But if you want to be serving in WebP, they're a great format, high resolution, low code bloat. Generally speaking, shrink images before upload. This is something that we will also see. So someone will download from Adobe stock, let's say they'll download an image that's 4,000 pixels wide and then upload it, a 5 megabyte image. Generally speaking, I tend to think that banners like that you see across the top of a web page should probably be about 2,000 pixels wide, maybe 400 pixels tall. Other than that, generally speaking, you probably don't need your graphic to be more than 800 to 1,000 pixels wide. And what you'll find is as you start to decrease the size of your images, that the size of the image decreases more than the aspect ratio. So in other words, if I drop an image from 4,000 pixels to 1,000 pixels, I might go from 5 megabytes down to 300 kilobytes. Right? It's a massive change just by shrinking the size of the image. If you have a lot of apps or a lot of images already in your system, consider using image shrinking plugins or apps to go in and optimize all those for you very quickly. Be aware some things might break, but it's easier to go and it might be easier to go and fix up those areas than trying to download and work on each one individually. Second thing, after you reduce your images is to reduce, or better yet, remove your third-party JavaScript. So there are a lot of, there was a period when everybody wanted like really cool interactions on the web. And there are a lot of things you can still do now. You can do now in what's called CSS versus JavaScript. So you don't need as many animations being powered by JavaScript as it used to be. But a lot of our websites are, which are 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, are still using a lot of third-party JavaScript to make things look cool, but add very little like actual value to an end user. And so my general rule of thumb is if you don't have a compelling reason to use a third-party script, don't use it. And if you do need to use it, only load them on the pages that actually need them. So for instance, if you have a chatbot where you're trying to filter leads or answer questions, you probably don't need those to load on your blog pages. My guess is that somebody who is, you're better off probably having calls to action to a more bottom of the funnel page on your blog, and then getting the chat there rather than trying to load this chatbot on every single page on your blog, right? So only load these scripts where you need them. If you have to load them, we tend to move them to the Google Tag Manager. And the reason is because Google Tag Manager does a lot to optimize these requests so that they don't block. And it also gives you a whole host of other tools to be able to analyze the effectiveness of different things on a web page. But generally speaking, if you're using third-party JavaScript, don't do it unless you have a compelling reason to do it. Only put them on the pages that need them. And if you must do it, try and load them through something like the Tag Manager, which will intelligently load the script in a way that's not going to hurt your performance. Third thing is remove any unnecessary JavaScript. So the difference between third-party JavaScript and this kind of JavaScript is third-party JavaScript is going to be something you've installed from another provider, your Google Analytics code, for instance, which don't remove it. You should keep that. But that's an idea of a third party. It's not hosted on your site. JavaScript that's hosted on your site is called internal JavaScript. And these are things that people maybe loaded in order to be able to have, a sticky sidebar or something, so that when you scroll, you can, your sidebar sticks when somebody is scrolling. Depending on how that was constructed, if you have internal JavaScript that is not serving a real purpose, you should remove it. The other thing you should do is, if possible, move it to the footer. So almost any time you're loading a new piece of JavaScript, the instructions say load it in the header. And in some cases, that is the right way to go because you do need the JavaScript to load before the rest of the page can load and make any sense. But if that's not the case, if it really is something that is only going to be useful sometimes, what comes to mind, for instance, is like a testimonial slider, which might be down at the bottom of a page. You're not going to lead with a testimonial slider. You might load the JavaScript for your testimonial slider in the footer because it's not going to be until somebody scrolls down that they're even going to see the slider if they even get to it. And then finally, if possible, you want to try and load these scripts asynchronously so it's not blocking the page load. And again, this is where this is probably a little bit more of a technical thing. But when you're working with your development team, you want to try and figure out which JavaScript can we move down, or which can we get rid of, and then which can we move down, and then how can we set it up so that these things are loading asynchronously, meaning that 3 are loading at a time, not one, then the other, then the other. Fourthly, thin out your code. Don't use heavy themes or plugins, and minify where possible your CSS, JavaScript, and HTML. Again, sometimes this won't apply. In fact, if you've been on our website in the last couple of days, you've been seeing us playing with different caching policies and minification policies. We broke a lot of stuff, so that's going to happen probably. But it's important to thin out your code, and you do that by reducing heavy themes and plugins. Generally speaking, if you're on WordPress, the Astra theme is a really good thin theme. The Beaver Builder theme is a really good thin theme. Elementor can be a really good thin theme. But then you've got other ones like Salient or Visual Composer, which people use to be able to construct their pages visually. And those can get very, very heavy very, very quickly. And they don't even have typically additional JavaScripts that add the cool interactivity. So use thinner themes and plugins where you can. And then, especially if you're getting a lot of traffic, you want to try and make sure you're minifying your assets, so which you can do with plugins like WP Rocket. Fifthly, you want to cache your system where you can. So caching essentially stores a copy of a page on a browser or server, so the page isn't regenerated when requested. In fact, in a lot of cases, if you are looking at a website and it doesn't look like it's rendering properly, it's probably because the version your cache is showing in the browser is different from what's actually been pushed from the server, and that discrepancy is causing a problem. In fact, I was joking about our website being a train wreck for a couple of days, and it wasn't a train wreck for everybody. It was only a train wreck for people that had our old cached pages because we'd forgotten to release the cache. And so caching stores a page on a browser. And so what happens is the next time somebody goes to a page or visits a resource, let's call it an image or a piece of JavaScript, it doesn't have to reload that. It just grabs it from its internal storage, and that makes it much, much faster. Finally, I generally recommend you just cheat with Cloudflare. So you can spend time doing all these optimizations. They're useful and they're really important. But we put almost every single customer on Cloudflare because Cloudflare can handle a lot of these optimizations for you, often for free or for like $20 a month or something like that. Now you can get more features, obviously, but if you don't have your DNS hosted on Cloudflare, you should really consider it. Again, outside the scope of how to do all that, but if you start to Google this and do some searches on Cloudflare, if your website's not running through Cloudflare and you're concerned about technical SEO, at least page speed and some of the other things we mentioned, sign up for Cloudflare, get a free account, move your DNS, and that'll take care of a lot of issues. Not all of them, but many of them. It's not going to cover up really poor architecture, but it does make it a little bit more palatable. All right, final thing I want to run through is the tools that you might want to consider or use if you're doing technical analysis. This is all part of ongoing SEO maintenance, especially if you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. If you're a website manager who, but you've got some other end users, an office assistant or someone else who's updating things, or a sales rep who is adding content to their personal blog or their section on a web page, they're probably not going to do a lot of these things. And so you want to make sure that you've got some way to be able to tell if your page, if your website is starting to get technically wonky. Some of the tools that I think are really important for this, one is one called Deep Crawl. So Deep Crawl is essentially a web crawler, very technically, it's one that will crawl all the pages on your site and start to find technical errors that need to get addressed. It's API rate limited, so you can crawl some of your site, all of your site. It really depends on what plan you're paying for. Ahrefs is also another really good tool that has some technical SEO tools, as well as some different bots and crawlers that will show you, where things aren't structured properly, or where there might be thin content, etc. If you aren't already using Google's page speed test, you should absolutely be using that. Now, one thing you should note is that when you're doing the Google page speed test, that you can only test one page at a time. If you sign up for and you configure the Google Page Speed API, you can run tests on dozens or hundreds of pages at a time. The Google Search Console, if you don't have that set up, you absolutely need to get that set up. Google will tell you if they think there are things on your website that are terrible. And so the Google Search Console will show you, hey, you've got 404 errors here. You've got what looks like duplicated content there, or whatever those cases are. And then finally, Google Analytics, because this is how you know whether people are even coming to your site or where on your site they're going. In general, when you're starting one of these initiatives, start with your most visited and your most profitable pages. So if you don't have time or budget to optimize everything on your site, start with like your cart and your product pages, or if you're a service, the service pages that convert the most often, right? So you really want to focus on the high value pages first, and Google Analytics will help you figure out which ones those are. Now, for larger websites, two tools that I think are absolutely essential. The Google BigQuery engine. So if you've ever tried to do any of this and start managing it in Google Sheets, you'll learn very quickly that it's very difficult to start managing data from all these different places in a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are built for calculation, not data mining. And so the Google BigQuery engine is a great tool to try out and learn how to use if you actually want to do some real technical SEO, especially on a bigger site. And then the Google Data Studio, which can consume different APIs and can consume information from BigQuery to help you visualize all this information in multiple places. For instance, we've built a tool ourselves that grabs data from BigQuery, Google Analytics, Page Console, SEMrush, Google's Page Speed Test, Deep Crawl, and runs them in through a tool called DBT, which is a data processing tool, and then creates a comprehensive SEO report that essentially takes information from all these different components for every page and quantifies the value of them and lets us also know which ones need the most work and where to prioritize them. So hopefully this is helpful. We've covered a couple of different things here. The couple of dimensions of technical SEO that I think you need to pay attention to. A couple of quick wins that I think you should pay attention to if you want to improve your technical SEO. And then some of the tools that I suggest you use to try and take it to the next level. These slides I will share with the hosts as well. So it's already, you can tell, in fact, if you're savvy, you might have already typed this out. These slides are available online already. And I'll make these available to the hosts so that way anybody who wants them can have them and look at them pretty quickly. And so if there's anything else that you guys ever need or you have any other questions about technical SEO, I think we've got some time for Q&A. But also, if you want to, we can we're happy to run an audit on your website. And in fact, anybody who's on this call, we'll give them a discount code to save 25% on the audit before the end of the year, just to close out 2020 and get a sense for what your website's looking like going into 2021. And then from there, you can decide which things you want to focus on, if any at all. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you. And looking to my other monitor now to see the other helpful people that are telling me what to do.
Jesse, thank you. This was really incredible. And that 25% discount that you just offered, I highly recommend that to those who are watching. And that's where I want to start with the Q&A. So we have a couple questions for you, Jesse, to get to. The first one I'm going to start with is with site speed, one of the most recent questions asked. And I happen to know, Jesse, that you've got some great examples too. You just showed the tool that you have with SuperWebPros and what that involves. And I'd love if you want to talk even a little bit about, Himmelho's department store. We just used the tool, your team, you just used the tool for them. I think that might be a great example. But we have a question here that says, do you have a preference on Builder or CMS for speed for less technical users? And I think kind of the emphasis there being on speed. So if you want to answer that first, and then maybe we can talk about a little bit more about this tool that you have.
Sure. So Skylar, this is a great question. And I've got a couple of answers for that. So the first one would be this: if you have the ability to do WordPress is actually not bad. It's just a matter of using the correct themes and the correct plugins. So if you have the ability to set up a WordPress site using the 5-minute WordPress install or whatever that comes with your hosting package, then WordPress is just fine. And I would look at using what's called the Astra theme. That's ASTRA. And if you want to use a page builder, which if you're not technical, I suggest you do, you want to use what's called the Beaver Builder page builder. Elementor is also a good one, but that stack is our default stack for most new sites because it's generally performant and it's easy for our non-technical users to be able to edit. If you're starting out on if that's even too much and you're looking at something like Squarespace or Wix or Weebly, short answer is you're going to be beholden to whatever their infrastructure is. Now, most of them, their infrastructure is pretty good. And so as long as you're not adding a ton of extra bloat, you will probably be fine. I have a biased person. I like Squarespace's builder the best of the other ones that I mentioned. But if you're already using a CMS that is a SaaS product like Wix or Weebly or Squarespace, there's not really a whole lot you're going to be able to do because they hold those cards pretty close to the chest. Same is actually true for Shopify. Shopify, we have a little bit more influence over than maybe Squarespace. But anytime you're using a SaaS product, which means you don't own the server, it's much, much harder. That would be the other thing that I didn't include in the presentation, but Skylar, I think was a great question, is a great point. one small thing you can do that actually really helps too with page speed is use a good server. You know, it's compelling to go and use GoDaddy's $9 a month server. And frankly, if you're starting out and caches is a problem, that's fine. Do it. Like, you're not, SEO is really not what you should be focusing on when you're just starting out anyways. But if you do have some traffic, it's definitely worth being on a server like WP Engine. You're going to pay more for it, but they do a lot of server optimizations that help a lot.
Okay, so in a great example of a client that had come to us, Jesse, wanting to focus on SEO, and you said, you know what, let's start with the site audit using the tool that you developed. So Himmelhost, can you talk us through just one more layer? Because you kind of bookended your presentation by talking about site speed. And that is also potentially one of the low-hanging fruit items that you referenced as well. So can you talk about using Himmelhost as an example? You know, what did this tool find when you did that site audit? Because I really want to emphasize for people why it might be worth it to have that done.
Yeah, this is a great question. So, so this was a client that Julie and I worked on together. And so they were concerned about SEO. They were concerned about site speed. They were on Shopify. And we ran this tool and we immediately saw a couple things. One was they were into the same image issue that I mentioned before, right? So they had been having, in some cases, they're third parties, designers in their particular case. They're a fashion company. They sell clothing. And they had been just uploading images that were sent over to them. And so they had a lot of images that were, 5, 6, 7 megabytes, right? So our tool was able to identify, you've got a bunch of big images. And so we were able to install a batch image resizer that was able to shrink a lot of them. And then we could go back through and audit any that were missed. That was one big thing. The other big thing that we found was this the third party scripts. And these really are like, these can really be problematic. So one, for instance, that I used to use and I don't use anymore is SumoMe. So we had one customer that it wasn't Himmelhost, but it was a different one that we had installed SumoMe on. And what we found when we started running these tools was that SumoMe was adding like almost 3 seconds worth of load time. It was just so slow. And it was over time. It wasn't even just like a glitch. And so, what we found with this particular client that Julie's talking about was that they had all this third-party JavaScript that we were able to either remove altogether or move over to the tag manager, so it was loading asynchronously on the appropriate pages, and that started to reduce the number of requests and the amount of blocking. And so we were able to start getting the page loading from 10 or 11 seconds, whatever it was, down into 3 or 4 seconds. Just on images and reconfiguring JavaScript alone. And then the next benefits we got were from putting them on Cloudflare, where we were able to get some of the other optimizations that we talked about. One of the great things about Cloudflare too, that I don't recall if it's in the paid plan or not, is the WebP image. So they've got their own bulk image resizer out of the box. But the other cool thing is that they will by default serve WebP images. And if WebP isn't going to work, it will automatically degrade. And they've also got a tremendous caching system, and it's global. So no matter where a user or a visitor is coming to your website from, you're going to be getting a pretty optimized page. So identifying that there are big images, reducing the size of them, moving the JavaScript code, and then putting them on Cloudflare. So it's like 4 of the things that I mentioned in our low-hanging fruit all apply to this particular customer.
Absolutely. And as Allison mentioned in the comments, changing, as you said, PNGs to JPEGs, super easy fix. That's going to, immediately help with those image sizes. Okay, another topic, Jesse, another question that's come up brings up this DIY question. And what should people be doing on their own versus what do we need to hire experts like you to do? So the question here is, are the indexability tips things we can do ourselves?
So part of the indexability, especially when you start talking about URL structure, those are things that when you are planning a website, you should be thinking about. A whole other topic of conversation would be describing content as it is. But when you are putting together your sitemap, or you're trying to figure out what pages am I going to build, to the extent that you're able to say, okay, my blogs are all going to be suffixed at blog/whatever. My services are going to be suffixed at service/whatever. My products are going to be suffixed at product/whatever. Like, those aren't arbitrary choices. So the closer you are to what's called the root, so the closer you are to the .com part of your URL, the higher priority both a user and a bot thinks it is. So for instance, products and services would be at the same level, whereas products, shoes, would be at a lower level in the sitemap than services, right? And so when you're thinking about these indexability or these architectural things, it's really about figuring out what information do I want to communicate and how can I organize it in a way that is going to be easy for someone to read and find their way up and down my tree, but also for a bot to understand that this is less important fundamentally than that is. And so, yes, you can do these yourselves. It just takes a little bit of thinking and planning about what your content is going to be so you can produce content in that way.
Jesse, is that something that people can reach out to you too? Do you do some consulting so you can help people maybe set up a strategy if they do want to DIY it? I'm thinking, in particular with some startups or maybe some associations, some groups that might need some guidance, but then are working towards this.
Yeah, so I don't do a whole lot of consulting, but we have our unlimited web development plans, which are intended to basically proxy that. And these start at like $199 a month. And the whole point of the unlimited web development plan is that Google's always changing, your business is always changing, your customers are always changing, the world is always changing, right? And so with these unlimited plans, the whole point is to provide you a resource, a pro, to be able to help you keep up with that based on the priorities of your business. So for instance, if you're just starting out, customers will often ask me if they build a website, am I going to rank in Google? And I almost always say, probably not. And they say, well, how much is SEO going to cost? And I'm going to say more than you think it should, and it's not the right use of money right now. If you're just starting out, you're probably going to get a higher return on investment from a small number of really well done landing pages optimized for conversion and some good ad copy than you will with SEO. Like, SEO is a really great thing after you've started to get traffic and you've got employees and a website manager and you actually have the ability to start planning out content beyond my home services about page, right? When you've got a 4-page website, in trillions of dollars of pages on the internet, it's probably not going to get found. And the people who are, in fact, actually investing in SEO are often spending tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of dollars a month on competing in SEO. And so, when it comes to the DIY part, where your business is at the beginning is very different than where it is at the end. A good example of this is somebody who's just starting out versus, like, we work with Playmakers, for instance, who has thousands of products that we've brought online for them. They have very different needs than someone small. But our unlimited plan is designed to say, okay, well, you're starting out, let's help you with the stuff you need to get to the next level. And then when you're someone like Playmakers, let's help you figure out how to go from where you are to really kind of dominating your industry. But there's a whole lot that happens in that progression.
And we have just a few minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, jump on in. I have one more question that I'm going to sneak in while we're waiting to see if anyone else has questions. And Jesse, this is something that you and I have talked about. We talked about recently with Paul and Chad. I know this is going to be top of mind for you as well at WLNS and Nexstar. So for years, we've heard the phrase mobile friendly. Now, there's really, of course, this big push to be mobile first, which is going to be a significant change actually coming in 2021. It was supposed to roll out this year, Jesse. The pandemic delayed that, maybe a good thing for a lot of people. But I'm curious, from your perspective, what is this change? And what do you kind of expect? What can we expect to see as far as our rankings are concerned?
Yeah, good question. So I think that fundamentally the change is recognizing that most of Google's traffic is coming on a mobile device, and that when someone's trying to consume information on a mobile device, that there are often different things that they might need or want on a mobile device that maybe are or are not relevant on a desktop device. So for instance, something simple like driving directions, right? If you're, well, I guess no one's going anywhere right now, but if you were driving somewhere, and none of us should be texting and driving, but occasionally you might need to figure out how to get somewhere, right? Being able to click a button on a phone and get to a map is actually really, really useful. It's not useful on desktop, right? So the point is that use cases are going to be a little bit different. But the other broader thing is trying to figure out, okay, well, if I'm thinking about my banners and my calls to action, and I'm thinking about my page flow, how do I organize it so it's mobile first? So one of the things that I think is important to recognize too is that when you're on a mobile device, scrolling is actually a really natural, really easy thing to do. So longer pages aren't bad. In fact, they're probably better on a mobile device. Like longer pages with clearer buttons is hugely important. So really thinking about the person who's looking at your website from their phone, what are they seeing is, when they're looking in this little screen, and also being aware of the fact that not everybody has your phone, right? iPhone 12 is different than the smaller than the iPhone 11, which is different than the mini iPhone, which is different than an Android. So what are the use cases that matter when you're looking on a mobile device, and really kind of organizing around that? What does the mobile user want?
More big things to watch for next year, Jesse. This has been so helpful. I know we've had a lot of questions, a lot of comments. What is the best way for people to connect with you if they have questions and to take advantage of this 25% offer?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to text you guys. So I don't know how you guys are going to distribute the slides, but I'll give you guys the slides so you can do that. And then there is a link on the last page of the slide to sign up for this if you want it. The other thing is on our website, there is like a book a call button, like I think pretty close to the top. So if you actually do want some advice on your website or you have questions about your specific use case, go to our website, superwebpros.com, click the book a call button. It'll pull up a calendar, select the day and time that works for you, and we'll be happy to talk with you specifically about your issues.
Excellent. Jesse Flores of SuperWebPros, thank you so much for your time today.
Hey, thank you guys. This was fun. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And that does it for Lansing Marketing Hackers for this presentation and for this year. Chad, Paul, I guess.
Happy New Year, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
And stay tuned for the next one. We'll figure out what that will be. And so, in a couple months, we'll have something new for you.